I am Karen Lips, the president of the Network of Enlightened Women. New was deemed 2021 the Year of the Conservative Woman. As part of this programming, we are featuring 12 women as our Conservative Woman of the Month to showcase their work as conservative women leaders. For March, in honor of Women's History Month, we are excited to recognize Justice Sandra Day O'Connor as our Conservative Woman of the Month. To speak to Justice O'Connor's career and accomplishments, I am pleased to be joined today by Allyson Ho, one of her former clerks. Allyson is a partner in the Dallas office of Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, where she co-chairs the firm's nationwide appellate and constitutional law practice. Allyson is widely regarded as one of the nation's most accomplished appellate litigators. She served as special assistant to President George W. Bush and counselor to Attorney General John Ashcroft. She's a graduate of Duke University, Rice University with an MA and PhD in English literature, and the University of Chicago Law School. She and her husband, Jim, a federal judge, have a twin daughter and son. To set the stage, I want to share a brief bio of Justice O'Connor. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was born in 1930 in El Paso, Texas. She received her BA and LLB from Stanford University. She served as Deputy County Attorney of San Mateo County, California from 1952 to 1953, and as a civilian attorney for Quartermaster Market Center, Frankfurt, Germany from 1954 to 1957. After that, she practiced law in Arizona and served as the Assistant Attorney General of Arizona from 1965 to 1969. She was appointed to the Arizona State Senate and was subsequently reelected to two-year terms until 1979, when she was appointed to the Arizona Court of Appeals. President Reagan nominated her as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and she took her seat on September 25th, 1981, after being unanimously confirmed. The mom of 3 sons, Justice O'Connor retired from the Supreme Court on January 31st, 2006. Since Justice O'Connor has withdrawn from public life, we are pleased to speak with Allyson to get to know more about Justice O'Connor's life and legacy. To start us off, Allyson, could you tell us a little bit about Justice O'Connor's role in your engagement?
Yes, and first of all, thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be a part of your organization, and especially to talk about Justice O'Connor, to whom I owe so much, especially the role that she played in my engagement. So I was clerking for the justice, and my husband surprised me by asking me to marry him. And what I found out after was that he had actually flown down. I'm from Texas, like the justice. I'm a Houston native. And he had flown down to ask my parents for my hand in marriage. And so my parents, shortly after we got engaged, had come up to visit and to see the court and to meet the justice. And so we were in her chamber talking, and my mother shared the story and about how much it had meant to them that Jim had flown down to ask for my hand. And the justice said, "Well, nobody talked to me about that."
Whoa.
So I got back to my desk and I called Jim and I said, "I think she was kidding, but I still think you should come in and meet with her." So we set up a little meeting and he came in and spoke with the justice, and we've been married many years. So all's well that ends well. But it was officially cleared.
That's hilarious. He had to go to double duty, huh?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, wow. Now, how far into your clerkship did that happen? And can you share about how you first got to know Justice O'Connor? Why did you want to clerk for her? And maybe share a little bit more about the clerkship process.
Sure. So that happened, I think that was it. We got engaged the weekend between Christmas and New Year's, and I had started my clerkship. I was one of the first clerks in. The new clerks usually start on a staggered basis over the summer before. So I met Justice O'Connor for the first time. I was clerking in New Orleans on the Fifth Circuit, and I had applied to all of the justices, and I owe my husband a great deal, but particularly that because I don't come from a family of lawyers. Just clerking on a court of appeals wasn't something that I really thought about. I also went to law school after having had another career. So I was a bit older than most folks sort of that level, and I really just clerking on the Court of Appeals level wasn't something that I had thought about, and so I was doing that, and I certainly hadn't even thought about clerking on the U.S. Supreme Court, or that I would have a chance at that. And so my now husband, then boyfriend, who had been a year ahead of me in law school, encouraged me. And he said, you know, if you don't try it, you'll never know. And so just put your applications in and see what happens. So I put my applications in, and not long after, I got a call from the justice's long-term assistant, Linda, who asked if I would come up and be interviewed by the justice. And I remember her being apologetic that the justice couldn't offer to pay for my airfare to come up there. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, just to meet Justice O'Connor, the first woman on the Supreme Court, you know, if I had to borrow the money, I would not, but I just, that's sort of so characteristic of her and her chambers that she cared really about those types of things. So I went up and I interviewed with the justice, and the only word that I can use for that experience is surreal. To interview with any justice on the Supreme Court is an incredible honor, but to interview with someone who had such a place in history as the first woman on the Supreme Court, again, the only word that describes it is surreal. And so I got back to my day job in New Orleans, clerking for Judge Wiener on the Fifth Circuit, and probably a few weeks later, got a call from the justice herself inviting me to be her law clerk, which was really incredible, and just I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for about the year that I clerked was I also had the opportunity to get to know Mr. O'Connor. And at that time, he was no longer, I mean, he was a very renowned lawyer in his own right. You know, they met in law school as well, and he was no longer working, but he would come to the chambers with the justice, and we did. As you may know, her chambers is sort of famous for a lot of field trips. She would take us to museums, she would take us to events, theater performances, and he would often accompany us. So getting to know him and seeing their marriage, how unbelievably supportive of her, how proud of her he was. No one was prouder of what she had achieved in her life than Mr. O'Connor. So in addition to the opportunity to clerk for Justice O'Connor, to have that opportunity that opened so many doors for me in my own career, but also to get to know Mr. O'Connor and to see the marriage that they had, was one of the biggest blessings of that year.
That's interesting that you mentioned Mr. O'Connor, because I feel like with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we would hear a lot about her husband and how supportive he was. And I don't think I've heard as much about Mr. O'Connor. So
I think that's right. He was he was Justice O'Connor's Marty Ginsburg. And I don't think it's a coincidence that those two trailblazers also had very, very supportive husbands who didn't just tolerate what they did and their achievements. But again, just as no one could have been prouder and more pleased with what Justice Ginsburg achieved in her life. No one was prouder and more pleased with what Justice O'Connor even though I think both men gave up to some extent, their own careers and that things like that, not just to be supportive, but to really be a partner to their Supreme Court justice spouses.
Well, that's a wonderful story to hear about his role and how supportive he was of her as well, because she really made history, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Justice O'Connor was is a trailblazer. Could you talk a little bit about how much that influenced kind of her everyday life when you were on the court? Did she talk much about being the first woman on the Supreme Court, or did she talk about what her career prospects were like when she graduated from Stanford?
So she never spoke to us in chambers about that, but she did speak and write widely about it. And a couple of the things that she said that I know mattered deeply to her. One of the things she said is, it's great to be the first, but you don't want to be the last. And I know that she felt a lot of responsibility as the first woman to do that job, that she would do it in a way that would clear the path for women who came after her. So I know that she felt greatly that responsibility of being the first. I think the justice was just a huge believer, and this is one of the ways that she influenced me, and I think all of her clerks. The justice was just a huge believer in the power of hard work and not letting your circumstances define you. One of my favorite stories about the justice is that when she, and she said she graduated near the top of her class, had incredible credentials, but had difficulty finding a job. And she went to a lawyer who had a relatively small practice. And the deal that she offered him was, I will work for you for nothing. I think it was for 6 months. And I will even sit out where your assistants sit. And I've already talked to them, and I've asked them if that would be okay with them, and it's okay with them. And then at the end of that 6 months, let's revisit and let's talk. And the qualities of the justice that to me are encapsulated in that story is, number one, her confidence, the kind of confidence she had. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it was really a humble confidence. It was just a deep confidence in herself, that she had enough confidence in herself to know that at the end of that 6 months, he was going to be impressed, and he was going to want to hire her. But she was not afraid or ashamed to roll up her sleeves and do the job that was in front of her to doing that job to the best of her ability. And I just think she lived her life according to a creed of just work, whatever job you find in front of you, work that job as hard as you can, do the best job that you can, but always keep your eye on that horizon for the next great thing to come along.
Well, her hard work definitely paid off. It seemed like she just kept rising in Arizona and caught President Reagan's eye and was nominated for the Supreme Court. Now, it's amazing to read that she was confirmed unanimously, 99-0. That seems unimaginable today in the confirmations we've gone through recently. Could you talk a little bit about that confirmation process and what made her appeal to so many senators across the aisle?
Well, I think as you say, first of all, it was a different world. Thankfully, the confirmation process had not become as politicized and as grueling as it is now. I think the fact that not only was Justice O'Connor unanimously confirmed, but if you look at how the votes for Justice Ginsburg's confirmation, and Justice Ginsburg had been, a lawyer with an advocacy organization. So it was a different world then. I know from what I've read about it that, the justice approached her confirmation as she approached everything else. She worked really hard She made sure that she was prepared and was ready to hit the ground running at the court and to take up her responsibilities when she was confirmed and arrived at the court.
And as we talked about, she was appointed by President Reagan. She quickly became a swing vote, and one that I remember in law school we'd often watch as we were reading through cases of, okay, like what do we anticipate Justice O'Connor is going to do on this? Could you talk about her jurisprudence and how she approached cases?
Sure. And I have to say, first of all, that she really, if you ever heard or saw recordings of her talk, she really did not like being called a swing vote. But the reality was that I think along with Justice Kennedy, she was sort of right there at the middle of the court. And I think her philosophy of judging was very much, as you say, taking each case as it came to her. She used to say that when she passed away, she wanted her tombstone to read, "Here lies a good judge." And I think to the justice, that really meant taking each case as it came.
That's powerful.
And I would mention, so today, we see so many of the individuals who are selected to serve on the Supreme Court, they come from the federal courts of appeals, I think almost exclusively. But Justice O'Connor had a different path. She was a state legislator. She was a state court judge. I do think that influenced one of the areas of the law that she really was a leader in, and that's federalism. Sort of our federalist system, where we have kind of the two sovereigns, the federal government and state governments. The purpose of both of them, really, and the purpose of that system of federalism is to preserve individual liberty. So I think that part of her background of having served in state government gave her a particular appreciation of the importance of federalism, and she was part of several key rulings in that regard. And one interesting thing about the justice is that, as I said, most of the judges who have been selected to serve as justices have come from the federal Court of Appeals system. Justice O'Connor did not, but after she retired, she did serve by designation on several U.S. Court of Appeals panels. And one former advocate is a good friend of mine, and he called me one morning and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I just got my panel for this argument that I have, and Justice O'Connor is on the panel." He was I think he was both excited and a little intimidated, but I just always thought that was interesting, and that she sort of reversed that, right? So she sort of went from the Supreme Court to the Court of Appeals and ended up having all of those experiences, just a little bit in a little bit different order.
Yeah, you mentioned federalism and how that became a focus and something she's remembered for. What do you think are her biggest contributions to the court? What will be her lasting legacy?
I think Justice O'Connor is one of those rare people that her legacy is really the person that she was. The first woman on the Supreme Court. I think to understand Justice O'Connor, you need to understand her growing up on a ranch. I think that she was one of the most self-reliant, resilient, we talk a lot about grit today. I think Justice O'Connor embodied grit before grit was sort of the cool thing to talk about. And she, another story about the justice, she was also very athletic. And when she took up golf, she actually practiced for months and months before she actually played a game, because she wanted to master the skills. And to me, that's a story that also just sort of defines her ethos in terms of her belief in hard work and practicing and giving it your all, and always aiming not for what the phrase, if we aim for perfection, we'll hit excellence. She held herself to very high standards, and you couldn't help but hold yourself to those same standards to be around her when you're around her.
Well, that's interesting. You talked about the golf story. You talked about hard work, having that grit. What was she like as a leader when you were clerking for her? Could you talk a little bit about the leadership qualities that you saw from her?
Yes. So she would receive just a multitude of invitations to speak when I had the honor of clerking for her, and she accepted as many as she could and as the court's calendar allowed, because I do think she felt a responsibility as the first woman Supreme Court justice, to be, and I think she would not have wanted to think of herself as any sort of like model or role model. I think her humility, the same way she didn't like to be thought of as a swing justice, she would say that, I'm just one, I'm one of nine. But I think she recognized how much her achievement meant to others. And she was incredibly, I think that's one of the things that I would take away from her as a leader, is she was incredibly generous with her time and her energy in talking with others, sharing with others, investing in other people's lives. I've mentioned just her commitment to working hard. She would never ask anyone to do anything that she had not done herself. So when I think of her role of leadership, her model of leadership, or what she contributes to being a leader, maybe the first thing to say is leaders don't all look the same or talk the same or come from the same background. You probably wouldn't have picked out, other than the Stanford law degree, you might not have looked at her path and said, oh, this is a future Supreme Court justice. So I think her legacy in terms of leadership will be her willingness to work hard, to embrace the job in front of her, and yet always keeping her eye on that horizon, and not expecting others to do anything that she had not already and at the same time was doing herself.
Well, those are wonderful, wonderful leadership qualities. And Allyson, we've been talking a lot about Justice O'Connor, but you are extremely accomplished yourself. So I want to see if I could ask you a couple of questions about leadership.
Sure.
Our audience is made up of young conservative women who often feel like they're facing unique challenges being conservative young women. Can you talk about leadership advice you'd give to them on how to be effective leaders now in their careers, and how they might respond when they feel like they're facing unduly harsh attacks just for being conservative women?
Sure. No, thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. And I guess the bridge from what we've been talking about in terms of Justice O'Connor, and that is during that year of clerking for her, I think maybe a lot of her confidence rubbed off on me. And I think one of the things that I would say to young conservative women today is you are not alone by any stretch. And those of us, one of the things I feel very strongly about in my own life right now is giving back and investing in others, to make sure that everything, and I just feel like I've been so blessed to be the recipient of what I have and the opportunities that I have been given, and that I feel like I have a responsibility to give that back and to help others. So you are not alone, and I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as conservative women. We feel like we have to be kind of the perfect exemplar of everything, and don't put that pressure on yourself either. Know that each and every day you're being strengthened, and for that moment when it does matter, when you will be called upon to stand up. But just please know that you're not alone. I like to say that although there may not be many of us, our ability to affect change in our world, I think we have an outsized ability to do that. And I am inspired. As much as I was inspired by Justice O'Connor, I am incredibly inspired by what I see on college campuses and in law schools, what conservative women are doing. And I want to be a help in whatever way, whatever way I can. And it really gives me a lot of hope and optimism about the future when I see young conservative women and what y'all are doing, and it spurs me on to keep at it as well. So in as much as the leaders like Justice O'Connor inspire us, y'all inspire us as well, and we're grateful for that.
Well, we're grateful you're sharing a little bit of Justice O'Connor's story with us today. And following up on that question of general advice for young conservative women, do you have any tips you could give? We've got a lot of women who are interested in pursuing law degrees and becoming lawyers. Any tips you'd love to give them as they're starting off on that career?
Sure. So I came to the law, like I said, I'd had another career. I'd been a college teacher. I knew sort of shockingly little about it. I just sort of, it was just, I was led to the law. And I think, so often we look and we think, and this also kind of gets back to Justice O'Connor, we kind of think there's one path, we see one path. There are so many different paths. If you look, I mean, just look at let's just take the women on the court today, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, Justice Barrett, all had very different paths and very different lives, and yet they've all reached the pinnacle of the legal community. So I would just really, people going to law school, just there isn't one path. I'm a big believer in sort of following, it's kind of overused now, but following your passion. But I guess really I would say that more kind of the dangers of being instrumental in your thinking. Don't think, oh, if I want to be X, I have to do Y. It may well be that most people who do X also do Y, but that doesn't mean that's the only path. So I would just encourage people starting out in law school. There's not a certain law school that you need to go to. There's not a certain judge that you need to clerk for. There's not a certain law firm that you need to be a summer associate. There are all sort of different paths, and there are all sorts of different ways to find fulfillment in the law, whether that is as a law firm partner, as a judge, as a public interest lawyer, as someone who goes to law school but then decides to go into policy or something else. Some of the most successful people I know who graduated from law school aren't lawyers now. They're not practicing law, but they're doing other things in journalism or public policy or the like. So there's not one path. So don't sort of think you have to be cookie cutter or follow just one path to have a successful, fulfilling career in the law, either as a lawyer or taking what you've learned in law school and applying it in something else.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I think a lot of times it's easy to think there's just a few paths out there and you do, these two things and you get to this point. But
yes, exactly.
The further you get in your career, I think the further you realize that a lot of times the paths just aren't linear.
Yes, I could not agree with that more.
Well, Allyson, I cannot conduct an interview about Justice O'Connor without asking about her exercise class. When we were in law school, you'd often hear little tidbits about the justices and things they like. And we used to always hear about her famous exercise class. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. So we had our exercise class with the justice 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And the year that I clerked, there were 3 women who clerked for her, 3 women and 1 man. And so we would come down from our morning exercise class, and he would kind of give us a grin. He would be sitting there at his desk already getting started on the day's events. And the thing that was wonderful about that exercise class that I don't know is as widely known is it was not just us and the justice, but it was also some of the justices' friends who would come. And so it was just sort of a fun thing. I joke with people now that was probably the last time I had a regular exercise routine, but the justice herself. So we did the exercise class with her 3 days a week. She actually did yoga and tennis, and when the weather was good, golf. So she really, she put us all to shame in terms of her level of physical activity and athleticism.
And wasn't the class held in the basketball court above the
It was, yes, it was. Yes.
That's
yeah.
fun. Well, I don't know why, but that seemed to be a very popular topic to talk about in law school, of this, little stories about the justices and what they were like outside of just reading, their cases and their opinions. So
yes, well, speaking of, I'll tell you another story. So it's one of those stories that it may not be true, but if it isn't, it should be. You mentioned the basketball court, which is right above the courtroom, actually. And justice. So just when the story goes that it was during a court session, and you could hear kind of the basketball. And so Justice O'Connor sent one of her law clerks a note and said, go up and tell whatever clerk is up there, it shouldn't be up there, court's in session. And according to the story, the clerk came back and handed Justice O'Connor, handed the note back to Justice O'Connor, and it says, Justice White says no. Justice White, who was retired at that point. And when I interviewed with Justice O'Connor, I got a tour of and went up to the court. And at that time, Justice White's locker, he had recently passed away. And so his locker with his name and all of his athletic equipment was still there. And I got to see that. So that was also a really special part of my clerkship.
That's a great story.
I was not one of the law clerks that played basketball on the team. Nobody would have wanted me on their team. I think they were content for me just to watch or hear the stories about the clerk basketball games.
Well, I'd like to end the interview on one last question, which is, you got started as a book club. So I'd like to ask you, what is one of the most recent books that you've read that you've really enjoyed?
So I actually have a great recommendation for you and your audience. One tradition, my husband always gives me a lot of books for Christmas. And this year, one of the books that he gave me, I really love it. It's called Raising a Rare Girl, a memoir. And it's an account of a mother who is raising a daughter with a rare genetic anomaly. And it's just about her journey as a mother and about how she comes to understand what inclusion means, and really embracing everyone and having a community together. So I heartily recommend that book. It's a wonderful book, and you'll definitely feel like your time spent reading that is very well spent. Memoir, Raising a Rare Girl, a memoir. I think it's by Caitlin here.
Well, thank you, Allison. I'll have to check that out. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some personal stories of your time clerking with Justice O'Connor and just helping the women who are part of NEW get to know a little bit more about her life and her role in history. And thank
Thank
you.
you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's really been my honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks again.
Wonderful. And thank you all who joined us today. Please check back next month for our next interview in our series for the Year of the Conservative Woman. Thank you.